Consistency doesn't feel powerful. That's why most people ignore it. It doesn't give you a rush. It doesn't give you stories to tell. It doesn't make you feel special. It feels dull, repetitive, unimpressive. And that's exactly why it works. Because consistency doesn't try to motivate you. It outlasts you. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain is wired to chase novelty. New plans, new goals, new ideas. Novelty feels like progress. It's not. It's stimulation. Consistency feels like nothing is happening. That's because the results haven't arrived yet. And most people quit before yet turns into reality. Now, let's talk about why boredom shows up. Boredom is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that novelty has worn off. When novelty disappears, reality begins. And reality is where progress actually compounds. Most people mistake boredom for misalignment. They think, if this were right, it wouldn't feel like this. Wrong. If it were right, it would feel exactly like this. Repetitive, quiet, unrewarded. Now let's talk about excitement. Excitement is front-loaded. It shows up at the beginning, when everything is new, when hope is high, when effort feels light. Consistency lives after excitement dies. That's why most people never experience its power. They leave when things stop feeling exciting. They assume something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. They just reach the part that matters. Now let's talk about how the brain responds to repetition. At first, repetition feels pointless. Your brain wants feedback. It wants reward. When reward is delayed, motivation drops. This is not a flaw. It's biology. Consistency works despite biology, not because of it. That's why it's rare. Now let's talk about how people actually fail. They don't fail because they stop once. They fail because they keep restarting. Restarting feels productive. It feels hopeful. It gives dopamine. Consistency doesn't. Consistency gives nothing up front. That's why it feels boring and why it wins. Now let's talk about the myth of passion. People say, follow your passion and it won't feel boring. That's false. Every path becomes boring eventually. The difference is whether boredom makes you quit or whether you stay long enough for mastery to kick in. Mastery is not exciting. It's calm, effortless, quiet. But you only reach it through repetition. Now let's talk about progress. Real progress is invisible at first. You're getting slightly better, slightly faster, slightly more precise. But there's no emotional spike, so you assume nothing is happening. That assumption is expensive, because progress is happening just beneath perception. Consistency compounds silently, until one day, it's obvious. But by then, most people are gone. Now let's talk about ego. Consistency doesn't feed ego. There's no applause, no validation, no big win moments. Ego hates that. So ego pushes you toward dramatic actions, big plans, big changes. Those feel important. They rarely last. Consistency doesn't feel important. It is important. Now let's talk about discipline. People think discipline should feel strong. It doesn't. Discipline feels boring, predictable, routine. That's why disciplined people don't look intense. They look calm because they removed emotion from execution. Emotion creates spikes. Spikes crash. Consistency avoids spikes. Now, let's talk about the middle again. The middle is where boredom lives, not the start, not the end. The middle, the long stretch where effort continues without reward. That's where consistency is tested. Not by difficulty, by monotony. Most people can push through pain. They can't push through boredom. That's why consistency separates outcomes. Now, let's talk about time. Consistency is not impressive short-term. It's unstoppable long-term. People who chase excitement look ahead and feel inspired. People who practice consistency look back and feel shocked. How did I get this far? That shock only comes from staying. Now let's talk about comparison. Consistency looks slow compared to bursts of effort. You see someone sprint, they look ahead. You plod along, you feel behind. But sprints stop, plodding doesn't. Months later, positions reverse. Consistency wins races. Nobody is watching. Now let's talk about confidence. Consistency builds quiet confidence, not bravado, not hype, confidence that comes from knowing I show up. That confidence doesn't depend on mood. It survives stress. Excitement-based confidence collapses. Now let's talk about boredom as a filter. Boredom filters out people who are here for feelings. Consistency rewards people who are here for outcomes. That's why consistency feels lonely. Most people leave. Now let's talk about systems. Consistency only works when it's designed, not forced. People who rely on willpower burn out. People who rely on systems get bored and continue. Boredom is easier to tolerate than exhaustion. Now let's talk about why people romanticize intensity. Intensity feels like commitment. It looks serious. But intensity is unsustainable. Consistency is unglamorous. But it's durable. Durability beats intensity every time. Now let's talk about your frustration. You feel like you've been doing the right things, but nothing is happening. That feeling is dangerous because it tempts you to change direction, to restart, to quit. That feeling doesn't mean consistency failed. It means consistency is working invisibly. Now let's talk about the illusion of progress. Planning feels like progress. Learning feels like progress. Talking feels like progress. Consistency is progress. Everything else is preparation. Most people live in preparation forever. Now, let's talk about why this matters. Because the longer you chase excitement, the longer you delay results. And the longer you avoid boredom, the longer you avoid mastery. Consistency is the toll booth. You pay with boredom, you get results later. Most people refuse to pay. Now, let's strip this down. Consistency feels boring because it removes stimulation. It removes novelty. It removes emotional reward. And what remains is work. Quiet, repetitive, uncelebrated. That's why it works. Because it bypasses the part of you that sabotages progress. Because understanding why consistency works isn't enough. You need to know how to stay consistent without hating your life. How to design boredom so it doesn't break you. And how to use consistency as a weapon instead of a chore. Consistency only works if it stops feeling like a fight. Most people fail here. They understand consistency intellectually, but emotionally, they still rely on motivation. That's why boredom breaks them. So here's the shift that makes consistency sustainable. You don't make consistency exciting. You make it automatic. Automatic beats motivated every time. Now let's talk about how people ruin consistency. They attach emotion to it. They expect it to feel meaningful every day. They expect progress to feel rewarding. They expect effort to feel justified. That expectation is the problem. Consistency is not meant to feel good. It's meant to run quietly in the background. Now let's talk about the first rule of consistency that actually works. Consistency survives when the bar is low. Most people set standards based on their best mood. That guarantees failure. Consistency is built on your worst day. The day you're tired, distracted, uninterested. If your system only works on good days, it's not a system. It's a fantasy. The minimum version is the real version. Now, let's talk about boredom again. Boredom doesn't mean you hate what you're doing. It means the brain stopped receiving novelty. That's good. Novelty distracts. Boredom focuses. When boredom shows up, you've entered the zone where skills actually deepen. This is where repetition rewires you. Now let's talk about why boredom feels threatening. Because boredom removes dopamine. And without dopamine, your brain asks, why am I doing this? That question is a trap. Consistent people don't answer it. They ignore it. They let the rule run. Now let's talk about rules. Consistency works when behavior is rule-based, not feeling-based. I do this at this time. I stop after this minimum. I don't skip twice. Rules don't care if it's boring. They execute. That's the point. Now let's talk about energy. Most people think boredom drains energy. It doesn't. Decision-making drains energy. Negotiation drains energy. Consistency removes decisions. That's why consistent people feel calmer, not more exhausted. They're not constantly asking themselves what to do. They already know. Now let's talk about variety. This is where people get confused. You don't need variety in whether you show up. You can add variety in how you show up. Same time, same habit, different intensity, different angle. That keeps the system alive without breaking consistency. Now, let's talk about progress perception. Consistency feels slow because progress is incremental, but incremental progress compounds. Dramatic progress spikes and crashes. People who chase excitement experience emotional highs and lows. People who practice consistency experience flat effort and exponential results. The curve is delayed. That's the price. Now let's talk about quitting. Most people don't quit because they hate the work. They quit because they think boredom means stagnation. It doesn't. It means stability. And stability is required for growth. Nothing compounds in chaos. Now let's talk about identity. Once consistency runs long enough, identity shifts. You stop saying, "I'm trying to be consistent," and start saying, "This is what I do." That identity removes friction. Because now skipping feels strange, not effortful. Consistency becomes default. Now let's talk about motivation one last time. Motivation is not the fuel, it's the side effect. Motivation shows up after consistency creates results, not before. Waiting for motivation is backwards. Consistency creates motivation later. Now let's talk about patience. Consistency demands patience without reassurance. No applause, no feedback, no visible wins. That's why most people can't do it. They need emotional proof. Consistency requires trust in the process, not blind faith. Trust built from repetition. Now let's talk about comparison again. Consistency loses in short-term comparison. It wins long-term competition. People who sprint get attention. People who stay get outcomes. Attention fades. Outcomes remain. Now let's talk about the emotional payoff of consistency. It's not excitement, it's peace. Peace from knowing you won't quit. Peace from knowing you'll show up. Peace from removing internal chaos. That peace is addictive and powerful. Now let's talk about the final mistake people make. They try to feel consistent. You don't feel consistent. You behave consistently. Feelings follow behavior. Always. Now, let's make this practical. Here's the consistency lock. You choose one habit. One, you define a fixed time, a minimum version, a no skip twice rule. Then you run it for 30 days. No optimization, no evaluation, no upgrades, just execution. If it feels boring, good. That means it's working. Now let's talk about after 30 days. You don't feel transformed. You feel stable. And stability is dangerous in a good way, because now you can build. Now, let's talk about mastery. Mastery doesn't feel exciting. It feels normal. Effort drops. Output increases. That's the reward consistency gives you quietly. Now the final challenge. This is simple. Choose one thing you've been inconsistent with. One. Lower the bar until it feels almost too easy. Schedule it. Then commit to boredom, not excitement, not motivation, boredom. Because boredom is the price of results. If this finally explained why consistency always felt dull but kept winning anyway, leave a comment with one word, stayed. And subscribe if you want more of this. Not hype, not intensity, but the systems that quietly build outcomes while everyone else keeps restarting. Because consistency doesn't feel powerful. It becomes powerful after everyone else quits.